President Trump is escalating a feud with two Republican senators, and this time he comes with an ultimatum. Yesterday, Trump posted on Truth Social and declared he has no intention of walking away from that controversial anti-weaponization fund, even if Senators Tom Tillis of North Carolina and John Cornyn of Texas continue to withhold their support for Todd Blanche, Trump's pick for Attorney General. But let's back things up a bit, because if you were trying to follow along this last week, I wouldn't blame you for being confused. Wednesday morning, the White House was in high spirits. Trump suggested that Blanche's confirmation was all but assured. That was wishful thinking, we now clearly know. The warning signs in the Senate had been building for weeks, though. Republican senators John Cornyn and Tom Tillis, newly dubbed YOLO Republicans, because of their seemingly newfound freedom and independence from Trump, granted by their lame duck status, repeatedly insisted that, to get their votes, Trump's anti-weaponization fund needed to be killed. This $1.8 billion slush fund was orchestrated by Blanche as acting AG as part of a settlement with the IRS after Trump sued the agency over his leaked tax records. Yes, Trump's own administration negotiated the creation of this pot of money. The fund is meant to compensate Trump allies who feel they were wronged by the government in the past years. That could, for example, even include January 6 attackers. Blanche has verbally promised that the fund is dead, but Senator Cornyn and Tillis, they want that promise in writing, a formal acknowledgement that the slush fund and future legal tax immunity granted to the Trumps are moot. That hasn't happened. By the end of the day Wednesday, Republican leadership realized without Cornyn and Tillis' vote, they didn't have the numbers to advance Blanche's nomination, and so his vote was postponed. Thursday afternoon, the two YOLO senators and Blanche sat down to hash it out. Senator Tillis recapped the seemingly productive meeting, tweeting that he found Blanche, quote, forthright, thoughtful, and patient. But he continued, it's a shame his confirmation has hit a snag only because an incompetent personal advisor to the president refuses to amend the bogus settlement. Then Trump oddly perhaps tried to say that the fund was dead, though he said this without clearly stating taking the formal steps required to actually make sure that it's dead. Here's what he said.
Do you agree with the acting attorney general that the anti-weaponization fund is dead? And why not just put that in writing?
Well, it is dead, but, I wish it weren't, to be honest with you. I think people were horribly treated, horribly abused. This has nothing to do with that. This was me.
And that brings us to this weekend, just yesterday, when Trump poured out his feelings about the whole affair, ultimatum style, on Truth Social, saying in part, quote, if Senators Cornyn and Tillis, both upset because I wouldn't endorse them, they lost and quit respectively, aren't going to approve Todd Blanche, then I will keep Todd as acting AG and push hard to get the anti-weaponization bill passed. Trump added, quote, Todd Blanche was a voice of reason. It will immediately be back on the table and I will get it done. The senators took note with Tillis writing, President Trump clearly intends to resurrect the payout pot for punks. The payout pot for punks. It's unfortunate that Todd Blanche, who I consider qualified for the job, will not be confirmed because of Trump's reversal. And that brings us to today. Blanche's committee vote is rescheduled for Tuesday. The Senate's got to work quickly if they want to advance him before August recess. Look, unless Cornyn and Tillis cave by Tuesday, Blanche, regardless, will be mostly right where he wants to be. Here's a reminder from April.
I love working for President Trump. It's the greatest honor of a lifetime. If he chooses to nominate somebody else and asks me to go do something else, I will say, thank you very much. I love you, sir. So I don't have any goals or aspirations beyond that.
But there's no evidence of that. And Todd Blanche knows that he could serve as acting AG for quite a long time if Trump tries maneuvering his way around the Vacancies Act. Regardless of what Article 2 of the Constitution says about the Senate's advice and consent role, we have reason to be very skeptical that Trump's former defense lawyer is going anywhere. Joining me now is Steve Bannon, MS Now political contributor and producer on The Rachel Maddow Show, and our friend. And also joining us is another dear friend, Katie Phang, independent journalist for Midas Touch and trial lawyer. Katie also recently sued the Department of Justice and Blanche over their handling of the Epstein files. We'll get to that in a moment, but for now, Katie, start us off here. Trump is threatening to keep the slush fund, $1.8 billion worth, back on the table. You say he's barking up the wrong tree. Explain why.
for a variety of reasons. Number one, there is no bill, so I'm not quite sure what he was talking about in this Truth Social post. But number two, a federal judge in the Southern District of Florida determined that there was the perpetration of fraud upon the court, which was participated by Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche and the Deputy Attorney General Stanley Woodward, whose name also should be familiar to folks who've been keeping track over the years. Stanley Woodward represented one of Donald Trump's co-defendants in the Classified Documents Espionage Act prosecution by former special counsel Jack Smith. But because of the fact that that lawsuit brought by Trump against his own IRS and Treasury Department was collusion from the start, this federal judge says, no settlement, no fund, no tax immunity, nothing, nada. It's just dead on arrival. And so I'm a little head scratching here about Cornyn and Tillis spinning wheels over something that a federal judge has said is. But I do understand why they're trying to chase this down. What I don't understand is why they just don't say, I'm going to vote no because of Todd Blanche's involvement with the Epstein files, but clearly they don't want to touch that at this point.
Steve, does the resistance indicate to you, or seeming resistance indicate to you, a broader dissatisfaction with Trump's agenda among Republicans in Congress, a type of fracture that we've wondered would ever come? I think that hits at the point of Katie's noting, is this serious? Will they actually vote no on Tuesday? Or is Trump is implying, is the story of two sworn senators getting revenge, and this ultimately mean just more consolidation, effective consolidation within his own power for the president?
Yeah, that's an important point, and I think it hasn't really been fully explored yet. Because really, when you look back at the context of the Senate right now, John Cornyn and Tom Tillis are taking the lead on this. But according to both of them, they're not alone. They say that they're representing a variety of Republican senators who also have the same concerns that they do about the Blanche nomination. And in fact, in recent days, we've seen a lot of evidence of that. We saw Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, whose term in Congress is also soon ending, saying he has concerns. We've seen Alaska's Lisa Murkowski stepping up and saying, you know what, maybe Blanche's confirmation isn't going to happen. And so really this YOLO caucus is not limited to two people who are stepping up. Really, we see this broader concern among GOP senators saying maybe Blanche's nomination is no longer a sure thing. Maybe the president's agenda in the Senate right now is very much in doubt. And so what does the White House do about that? Well, according to Donald Trump, the solution is to call for more money. He wants to pay off January 6th rioters, which is, of course, the opposite of what really needs to happen at this point if he's going to get what he wants.
Katie, I think this hits at the heart of, by the president saying yesterday, essentially, that he's going to do whatever it takes to have this $1.8 billion slush fund created, goes to show the lengths to which this administration is willing to engage in what could easily be described as outright corruption to pay off allies of his that, you know, they'll make claims about these folks were, you know, unfairly targeted. But the reality is that the Justice Department also potentially has other means to hand out effective cash if they wanted to. Could you kind of lay out, you know, the Justice Department still paid an anti-abortion activist over $1 million over his claims that they were unfairly mistreated by the government. So if this so-called anti-weaponization fund, even if Cornyn and Tillis were to hold it up, how could the DOJ seek to try to pay out Trump's allies beyond it?
So the $1.8 billion slush fund that would help these insurrectionists would be coming from a bigger pot called the Judgment Fund, right? And the Judgment Fund is used to be able to pay out settlements and verdicts and judgments that stem from federal tort claims litigation or claims that are made against the federal government. But those FTCA claims, those get vetted, I mean, ostensibly by a legit Department of Justice, Vaughn. And so when you think about the idea that there would be somebody who would legitimately, credibly gatekeep these claims, yeah, that's what the FTCA was designed to do. The government screws up, you got to pay this out. But that's a totally separate thing, right? The real corruption here is the initiation of the lawsuit and the genesis of it. Trump wanted to give cover to create the slush fund for the insurrectionists and for his buddies that he wanted to be able to pay out money to, including people like Michael Caputo and Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn, right? So he created this lawsuit, went through the whole charade of it, and when a federal judge busted him on it, he's like, oh, well, I could just now do this the way I want to do it through a bill. It ain't going to work that way either, because as Tillis said, you're not going to get the support from Republicans to get it across the finish line. But here's the other kind of charade that's happening too. Because Todd Blanche was Senate confirmed last year, he can serve in the role of acting attorney general for a long time. So if I'm Cornyn and Tillis and other Republicans on Senate Judiciary, why are you going to waste any goodwill you have with the American people and vote yes on Blanche? If you vote no on Blanche, he doesn't advance, and then, you know what, look, he never gets through the entire Senate to be able to get voted on. At this point, I want to save at least some of my integrity and vote no. Again, there's myriad reasons, including the fact that Blanche was responsible for the Epstein files, which, again, I don't hear Cornyn and Tillis talking about. Tillis told Blanche to go meet with the Epstein survivors. He was rude and dismissive and disrespectful and told them, hurry up and make your point. And I think that alone is a disqualifying moment for Todd Blanche.
Katie, I want to get to the Epstein files, in particular your lawsuit and revelations here this week. But Steve, Katie mentioned the acting AG position. Can you just kind of lay out how you foresee 2027 and 2028 looking like? Because the Vacancies Act, it provides quite a bit of leeway that we haven't seen presidents in the past use.
Right. You know, what I find absolutely amazing about this is the White House's expectation that things are going to get better, that looking down the road, things are actually going to improve for Blanche's prospects, for the Senate prospects. The president does not know, neither does anyone on his team know, whether or not there's even going to be a Republican majority in the coming year. And there's a reason to believe there won't be. And if it exists, it'll be smaller. And so really, I'm baffled by this idea that Trump thinks, oh, you know, if we just wait a few months and allow Blanche's opposition to gather its forces and to make a more forceful case against him, that somehow this will improve the Attorney General nominee's opportunity for confirmation. The opposite is true. You know, just as a matter of strategic thought, I think Donald Trump is getting some very bad advice, or he's just wrong. And either way, the idea that this is going to get better for him is the opposite of what's actually going to happen.
What does the executive branch look like, though, in 2027, 2028? Forget Blanche for a moment. The president seems to have not much eagerness to put forward anybody that will get bipartisan support. Is there an instance where we just see a bunch of people serving in acting capacities? Could he do
Most
that?
definitely, yes. I mean, we're already seeing some of that now. And in fact, we saw some of it in the first term. But I think that really Donald Trump realizes at this point, despite the fact that there is a 53-member majority for his party in the Senate, that as he's a lame duck status, as he becomes more unpopular with the public, there's less and less incentive for the Senate to do his bidding. And so really, he's relying more and more on these acting people because I don't think he feels like he has any other choice.
Katie, Blanche's nomination, it's facing significant opposition, as we've laid out, not just because of the slush fund, but also, this is a credit to your work as well, around the handling of the Epstein files. Can you tell us what the update is on your lawsuit against the Department of Justice? And I know that even on Thursday, I believe, there was an update coming out of the courts. Can you kind of tell folks where this is at and how you see it potentially impacting Blanche ahead?
Yeah, because of my lawsuit, which remains the only one that was brought pursuant to the Epstein Files Transparency Act, we had an unprecedented moment where a federal judge received a subset of the entirety of the Epstein files, and they were unredacted. And so now a federal judge is reviewing a submission by Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche of unredacted emails and documents, and also looking at allegedly corroborating documents that would support Blanche's claim that the redactions he's made are legitimate and can be sustained. What we're waiting from Judge Sullivan are a couple of things. One, some indication from him as to whether or not he believed what Todd Blanche submitted, because this was also an unprecedented moment that an acting attorney general was told, you have to show your work, because I don't believe the representations you've made in a court filing. There's also 3 remaining areas of a preliminary injunction that I had granted by this judge that have not been addressed at this moment. 1, the FBI handwritten interview notes of a woman who alleges that when she was 13 years old, she was sexually and physically abused by Donald Trump. 2, the redaction log that the Epstein Files Transparency Act requires the Attorney General to have to produce, in addition to a summary of the redactions and withholds. And 3, foreign language documents that have never been translated that I think are incredibly important to speak to the transnational, international component of this multi-decade sex trafficking ring. It was not Jeffrey Epstein trafficking victims to himself. And it wasn't just Ghislaine Maxwell. There are dozens, if not hundreds, if not more, perpetrators and